Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We're in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha's Ki Tisa. We're in the sefer. It's Daf Tuf Shin Ayin Tes, and this is going to be Os Dalid, the section number 4. Let's take a look at two psukim from the Parsha of Ki Tisa that the Zera Shimshon is going to discuss. So Perek Lamed Aleph in Shmos, psukim Yud Beis and Yud Gimel say as follows. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem said to Moshe, saying, Ve'atah daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, and this is Hashem, of course, talking to Moshe Rabbeinu, and you should speak to bnei Yisrael and say, Ach es shabsosai tishmoru, however, my Shabboses, my Shabbosim you should keep, ki os hi beini uveinechem, because this is a sign between me and between you, lidorosechem, for your generations, lada'as, to know, ki ani Hashem mikadishchem, that I am Hashem who sanctifies you. So the Zera Shimshon is going to open with talking about those psukim and asking. He's going to ask 4 questions right in the first paragraph. So let's hold on to your seats, hold on to our hats. Pasuk, the pasuk says, Ach es shabsosai tishmoru, however, my shabbosim you should keep. That's the pasuk we just looked at. Koshek, question number 1. Lama kosav shabsosai b'loshen rabim. Why did the Torah word my shabbos in the plural form? V'lo amar es haShabbos, and it didn't say. Why didn't the pasuk refer to Shabbos in the singular form? K'moshe matzinu b'chol haTorah, as we find in the rest of the Torah, right? Shabsosai, my Sabbaths or my Shabbosim, in the plural form. The Zera Shimshon says that should catch our attention. Why did the Torah use the plural form of the word Shabbos and not the singular form Shabbos, which is what we're used to? Umilas ach, this is question number 2. And the word ach, however, ma bo lemait, what does it come to exclude? Chazal teach us that the word ach, when it appears in the Torah, is coming to exclude something. It's coming to tell us that something that you would have expected to be included in what we're talking about is actually excluded. So what is it coming to exclude here in this pasuk about ach es shabsosai tishmoru? Now, question 3. Gam yesh ledaktek, we also need to analyze al masha omru zichronim levracha b'perek gimel d'Shvuos, what Chazal say in the 3rd parak of Maseches Shvuos, shezochor v'shamor b'dibor echad ne'emru. The word zachor, which means to remember, and the word shamor, which means to guard or to keep, were said at one time. Were said in one word. Were said at the same instant, the same moment. And here, let's just pause for a moment. The Gemara there is referring to the fact that when you look at the Aseres HaDibros, the way they are presented in Parshas Yisro, you'll see that in the mitzvah about Shabbos, the word that is used is zachor, to remember the day of Shabbos. And if you look at the Aseres HaDibros, the way they are presented in Parshas Va'eschanan, you'll see that the word shamor is used, a different word. So of course the question arises, which word did Hashem actually say? Did he say zachor or shamor? And the Gemara answers, Hashem said both zachor and shamor at the exact same instant. And the Gemara comments, this is something that is not humanly possible to do. And it's also not humanly possible under normal circumstances to hear 2 words being said at exactly the same time coming from the same source, but that is in fact what Hashem did according to the Gemara in Shvuos that the Zera Shimshon is bringing down. V'lama dafka b'dibros harishonos ksiv zochor. So the Zera Shimshon says, why specifically in the first presentation of the Aseres HaDibros do we see the word zochor, meaning in Parshas Yisro, ubishnios kosav shamor, and in the second presentation of the word of the Aseres HaDibros, we see the word shamor. Why did the Torah split it up in that way? If the 2 words were at the same time, why did zachor appear in Yisro and appear in Parshas va'eschanan. That's the third question. Va'od temia gedola. And in addition to these first three questions, there's a tremendous question, a great wonderment to ask. Shebedibros harishonos nosein hakosov tam. In the first presentation of the Luchos in Parshas Yisro, the Torah gives the reason, al shmira Shabbos, for keeping Shabbos, for the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos. What's the reason? Ki sheishes yomim osa Hashem. The Torah says, again, we're talking now about in Parshas Yisro, when we first see the text of the Aseret HaDibros, it says, why is Hashem commanding the Shabbos? For us to keep Shabbos? Because Hashem created the world in 6 days, and rested on the seventh day, Dahainu Zeichel B'riyas Ha'olam, which means it's intended to remind us to be an eternal reminder of the creation of the world. Ubishnios, but when we see the Aseret HaDibros presented the second time in Parshas Va'eschanan, Nosan Tam Acher, the Torah gives a different reason. Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it says we're being commanded to keep Shabbos as a way to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Dichsiv, as it says over there in Va'eschanan, v'zacharta ki eved ha'yisa b'Mitzrayim. You should remember that you were a slave in the land of Mitzrayim. So the Zera Shimshon here has asked 4 questions. 2 of them specifically have to do with the pasuk that we read here in Ki Tisa, and then the next 2, the third and the fourth, kind of pull back to 20,000 feet. And they look down and say, actually, now that we're asking questions, let's pose much more fundamental, basic questions about the differences, or at least some of the differences between 2 of the differences, in this case, between the way the Aseret HaDibros are written and presented in Parshas Yisro versus the way they were written and presented in Parshas Va'eschanan. So we have 2 kind of localized questions on the pasuk in Parsha, in our Parsha of Ki Tisa, and then we have 2 big questions that relate to the differences in the way the mitzvah of Shabbos is presented in the 2 different times that the Aseret HaDibros are presented in the Torah. So that adds up to the Zera Shimshon's 4 questions. Now let's continue. V'nakdim, top of the second column, v'nakdim l'taretz, my disalik nomine. Let us begin to answer these questions with the questions that we concluded with. So the Zera Shimshon is going to start from the 3rd and 4th question before he comes back around to answering the 1st and 2nd question. So he begins, Omru zichronim levracha, Chazal say in Maseches Eruvin, Ki nitnu luchos harishonos liYisrael. When the first set of luchos were given to Bnei Yisrael, nitnu lahem cherus, the Bnei Yisrael were given freedom, mi Yetzer Hara, from the Yetzer Hara, cherus mi shibud malchios, and they were given freedom from the dominance of the nations of the world. So the Zera Shimshon is bringing down an amazing Gemara, which says that when Hashem gave the Luchos the first time to Bnei Yisrael, not only did they receive this unprecedented, miraculous, incredible gift of the Luchos, but they received the gift of being freed from the power of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara no longer had any sway over them, and being freed from the power of the nations of the world. The nations of the world had no power over them. Ve'alehem Omar, and about the Bnei Yisrael at that time in Jewish history, the pasuk in Tehillim says, Ani Omarti Elohim atem. I said that you are like Elohim, meaning you are like Malachim, you are like angels. Why? Because the angels the Yetzer Hara has no sway over the angels, and the nations of the world, of course, have no sway over the Malachim, over the angels. So the pasuk in Tehillim, the Zera Shimshon says, is referring to Bnei Yisrael at the time of their reception of the first set of Luchos. They were like Malachim, and that they were completely freed from the power of the Yetzer Hara and the power of the Umos HaOlam. Ukeshechotu be'egel, and when the Jewish people in Bnei Yisrael sinned with the Egel, Chazar Yetzer Hara l'makomo v'chulei, the Yetzer Hara returned to its place, as did, meaning returned to its power, as did the Shibud Malchios, as did the domination, the power of the nations over the world, over Bnei Yisrael. Both of those things returned after the Chet HaEgel. The Yadua, and it is well known, Mashikosu HaMeforshim Zichron Levracha, what the Meforshim wrote, She'im Hayu Misakvim Yisrael B'Mitzrayim, if the Jewish people had been held back in Mitzrayim, Ad Tashlim Ha'arba Meos U'Shloshim Shana, for the full 430 years that are Kemoshe Nigzar Alehem, that had been originally decreed upon them, and that number of 430 is what appears in Parshas Bo. When it talks about Bnei Yisrael leaving Egypt, the Torah explicitly states that they had been in the land of Mitzrayim, although we're not intended to understand it literally in the land of Mitzrayim, but they had been in Golus, so to speak. They had been in a form of exile for a full 430 years, but they had not been enslaved in Egypt for 430 years. So the Zera Shimshon is saying, that the Meforshim write that if Bnei Yisrael had been able to bear and to exist under a 430-year domination in the land of Mitzrayim, which did not happen, lo hayisa'od uma v'loshen yechola lishplot bahem, then there would have been no nation in the world and no people in the world who could have had power over them. However, because Hashem had to take Bnei Yisrael out quickly before the full time was concluded, because Bnei Yisrael was rapidly approaching the 50th level of impurity, from which Chazal help us understand that they would no longer have been able to be redeemed had they reached that abyss, that incredibly low spiritual point which they were approaching. Mishum hachi letashlum hasach hanizkar la'el. Therefore, because Hashem had to take them out of Mitzrayim earlier than originally projected, the completion of the sum that was mentioned before, nigzar aleihem golios acheros, it was decreed upon Bnei Yisrael that they would have to undergo other experiences of exile. As we have spoken at length about this topic, bidrushim acherim and other drushos le'el previously b'makomam in their places. So the Zera Shimshon says this is not a topic that I need to expound upon at length here because we've discussed it in previous pieces in this sefer in the Zera Shimshon. But he's pointing out that the idea that he's pointing out is that there was an opportunity for Bnei Yisrael to complete the entire Golus experience of its destiny had they been able to be enslaved in Egypt for 430 years. However, that was not possible because of their approaching the 50th level of tumah, of impurity, and therefore Hashem took them out before that, and therefore Bnei Yisrael, even after coming out of Egypt later in their future, had to suffer golios acheros, other experiences of exile. So now let's see how the Zera Shimshon begins to use the information he developed for us to answer his questions. V'lochein b'dibros harishonos, in the first set of luchos, which the Zera Shimshon says are the text of which we see in Parshas Yisro, Shahayu Yisrael Kimo Elohim, when the Jews were on the level of angels, Kedichsiv, as the pasuk in Tehillim states, Ani Amarti Elohim Atem v'chule, I said that you are like angels, like malachim, Mishum Hachi Shayich Iker Shabbos. Therefore, since the Bnei Yisrael were on the level of malachim, the essence of Shabbos, ushmirosam, and their keeping of their observing of Shabbos is represented bizachor, by the word zachor, to remember the Shabbos. Ve'aseh de Shabbos, shezachor zu mitzvos aseh, that the word zachor encapsulates or expresses the positive mitzvos of Shabbos. V'shomor lo saseh, and the word shomor, to guard or keep the Shabbos, represents the negative commandments of Shabbos. The aseh de Shabbos and the positive mitzvos of Shabbos, who lekadsho, is to sanctify Shabbos. That's when we make kiddush, the mitzvah d'oraisa, the Torah mitzvah of making kiddush on Shabbos. B'machal uv'mishta, and we sanctify it with what we eat and what we drink, uv'divrei Torah, and with the divrei Torah that we share at the meals, v'chulei, etc. That's all represented and included in the word zachor, the positive mitzvos, the things that we do on Shabbos to show that it's sanctified and it's unique. V'shamor hainu shelo lasos bo malacha. And the word shamor is telling us not to violate the malachos, not to do any forbidden labor or work on Shabbos. V'kodim shechatu, and before Bnei Yisrael sinned with the egel, shelo hayelahem od hayetzer hara, when they did not have the yetzer hara, v'hayu kamo Elohim, and they were on the level of malachim, afilu b'chol lo hayu osim malacha. Even during the week, during that time period between the appearance of Bnei Yisrael's appearance at Har Sinai, Ma'amad Har Sinai, and the Chet HaEgel, Bnei Yisrael didn't even have to do work during the week. Not only was it no problem to refrain from doing malacha on Shabbos, but even the regular weekdays, they didn't have to do work. As it will be in the future times, Dichsiv, as the pasuk in Yeshaya says, Ve'omdu zarim v'ra'u tzonchem. Strangers will stand up, will arise, and they will shepherd your sheep, right? So that's the nevuah about what will happen in the time of Mashiach, that Bnei Yisrael will have all of the work that they need done taken care of by others. And so too, during this time period in the Midbar, Bnei Yisrael didn't have to worry about doing any kind of regular work that they might have needed to do even during the week. The Adarabah, and just the opposite, lo hayu choshishim nami la'achila v'shtia. They didn't even have to worry about trying to sustain themselves with food and drink during the week. They didn't need to be involved in the normal process of plowing and sowing and reaping and harvesting and grinding and milling and baking bread. They didn't need to do all of those things, all of those activities to produce food for their families, v'chulei, etc. Umishum hachi, and because of this, hutzrich lomar lahem zochor. That's why the perfect, most apt and appropriate word for them in terms of Shabbos was zochor. Shehu ha'ikar hatzarech lahem. It is the essence of Shabbos that was most relevant and most needed by them when they were in this exalted spiritual state before the Chet HaEgel. They weren't focused. They didn't need to be told not to do malacha on Shabbos. They weren't even worried about malacha during the week. So on Shabbos, they didn't need to get a special warning about not doing malacha, but rather they needed to be told how to make Shabbos special and unique, even during a time period when during the week, malacha wasn't being done. So, and what were they told? They were told to make kiddush and to sanctify the day and to celebrate the day in all of the positive ways that we are mitzvah, that we are commanded to celebrate Shabbos. Continuing on the bottom of the second column. Omnam, however, la'achar shechotu, after Bnei Yisrael sinned with the Egel, hutzrach lehazhiram al shvisa mimalacha. Then it became necessary to warn them about refraining from doing the prohibited work of Shabbos, the malacha. Shezehu ha'ikar hatzarech lahem le'es ata. Because that became the essence of Shabbos that was relevant to them at that point. They had once they committed the Chet HaEgel and the Yetzer Hara came back and the Shibud Malchios came back, and they did have to, they were no longer in their exalted state, and they did have to do different types of work for themselves. So the Torah says now we need to tell you, and the second set of luchos after the Chet HaEgel, now Hashem says we need to put the word shamor. The emphasis shifts over from zachor to shamor. Ubedibros harishonos, and in the first set of the luchos, shelo hayo lahem od golios acheros. At that point, there would not have been, had they remained in their exalted spiritual state that they were in when they received the first set of luchos, they were no longer, at that point, they would not have had any other exiles, because as we said, at that point, they were no longer subject to the power of the Umos Ha'olam, to the domination of the Umos Ha'olam. Tam hashabes haya mibnei brios ha'olam, brias ha'olam. The reason given in the first luchos, as we see in Parshas Yisro, was for connected to the creation of the world. That is what is the Torah tells us about what is behind, underlying the keeping of Shabbos, the mitzvah of Shabbos. But after they send with the Egel, nischadesh tam acher b'shmir Shabbos, a new reason became applicable to them regarding the keeping of Shabbos. Bishvil Yitzias Mitzrayim. Now Shabbos was connected to the exodus from Egypt. Mipnei sheyitzias Mitzrayim shelo be'onasa, because the fact that the Jews left Egypt at the out of the correct time, before the correct time, mechayvim legolios acheros, they became obligated to undergo future exiles. Ubeperek kol kisvei, and in the perek kol kisvei in Masechta Shabbos, Amrin and Chazal say, kol hameshamer es Shabbos, anyone who keeps Shabbos, nitol mishibud malchios, can be protected from the control of the power, the subjugation of the governments of the world. Therefore, specifically in the second set of luchos, the later set of luchos, nosan lahem tam, which came after the Chet HaEgel, therefore the Torah gives the reason, nosan lahem tam zeh al haShabbos. This reason about Yitzias Mitzrayim is the reason that's given for keeping Shabbos. The Dayek Shapir Kra, and the Torah, the pasuk is very careful, lemeimar, to say, v'zacharta ki eved ha'yisa, and you should remember that you were a slave in Egypt, v'chulei, etc. V'yiftecha Hashem alokecha misham, and Hashem redeemed you, He rescued you from there. V'yad chazaku v'zron netuya, with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm. V'lama hutzruch b'yad chazaka, and why was it required to have a mighty hand? Elavadai tzarech lomar, but definitely we need to say, mipnei shelo adayin lo nishlam haketz, because the end of the exile experience still had not been reached. V'siyem hakosov, and the pasuk concludes, al kain tzivcha Hashem alokecha lasos es yom haShabbos. Therefore, Hashem, your God, commands you to do the Shabbos, kedei shetipode nafshecha, in order that your soul can be redeemed, mishibud malchios, from being controlled by the nations of the world, as the Zera Shimshon quoted just a moment ago, the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, about keeping Shabbos protecting us from the domination of the nations of the world. So that moves to the fore in the second luchos, because the second luchos are applicable to Bnei Yisrael's experience after the Chet HaEgel, when the power of the Yetzer Hara has come back, when the power of Shibud Malchios has come back, and when the idea of leaving Mitzrayim and experiencing future exiles comes to the fore. The last paragraph. V'zehu nami de Parsha zu. Now the Zera Shimshon is going to get back to the first two questions he asked originally. And this also applies to our Parsha, Kosav, where the Torah wrote, Ach es Shabsosai. However, my Shabboses, Shemikra ze ne'emar la'achar Chet HaEgel. This pasuk was said after the Chet HaEgel. So when it says Ach es Shabsosai, the significance of the words Ach is to say, now these things are different. Things have changed. We're excluding the way things were before, when Bnei Yisrael had not committed the Chet HaEgel, and they were free from the power of the Yetzer Hara, and they were free from the power of the Umos HaOlam. Now we're saying, no. However, now after that is no longer true. Keep my Shabbosim, keep my plural Shabboses. Kidi Amrinon, as we say in the Medrash Rabbah, Yovo Zohav Shebamishkan v'yachaper al Zohav ha'egel. The gold that is used to serve Hashem in the Mishkan can come and bring atonement for Bnei Yisrael on the gold that was used to make the Egel. And when we're talking about the building of the Mishkan, is the subject matter of the beginning of Parshas Ki Tisa, right before the pasuk says Ache Shabsosai. So the Zera Shimshon saying, so we see confirmed that this pasuk is talking about after the Chet HaEgel. The cause of Ach, and the Torah wrote the word Ach, however, Lomar, to say, Ata shechatosem, now that you have sinned with the Egel, the Gorim lachem shechazer yetzahar v'shibud malchios, and you cause, through this sin, you cause there to be a return of the power of the Yetzer Hara and the power of the nations of the world over Klal Yisrael. Hatikun shelachem, who the repair, the tikkun that you need to do is shetishmeru shabsosai. You need to keep my Shabbos is plural, lashon rabim in the plural form. The amrinon beperik called kisvei hanizkar la'el, because in the same parak which we quoted before of Masechta Shabbos, Chazal say, ilmole mishamrim Yisrael beis Shabbosos. If the Jewish people will keep 2 Shabboses, miyad nigolim, immediately they will be redeemed. So why does it say Shabsosai in the plural form? Zera Shimshon says it's to tell us that now we need to keep 2 Shabboses in order to be redeemed. Before, in the first Luchos, when there was no question, no issue of the Shibud Malchios, of the power of the nations of the world, we didn't need to use a word like Shabsosai. But here in Parshas Ki Tisa, after the Chet HaEgel, we need to talk about plural Shabbosim because of the terrible burden of the exile, and so Hashem reminds us Shabsosai, keep 2 Shabbosim, as Chazal tell us in Masechta Shabbos, in order to be redeemed. If all of Klal Yisrael kept the 2 Shabbosim, then the Jewish people would be immediately redeemed. V'chein yehi ratzon, and so it should be the will of Hashem to bring the Geula b'mehera, to bring the redemption quickly. And yashkoch to everyone for joining us in the learning of the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Ki Tisa. We look forward, God willing, to learning the Zera Shimshon on next week's Parsha together next week.